the US champagne market and especially the importance of importers. And then we can also talk about where to find information in archives, because Marissa is writing a historic book on the Bollinger importer in the US. So, Marissa, tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then, how you sell champagne and what champagne you sell in the shop, and maybe how long you've been doing this.
Sure. So, my first job actually was in a wine shop. That's how I started in the wine business. And at that time, we definitely sold, like, our big thing was Veuve Clicquot, right? So
Mm-hmm.
back in the late 80s. And that was when Veuve Clicquot was just kind of getting started and rolling out in the market. And then I went to New York and I worked for a distributor. And then at that time, like Tattinger was or Tattanger was the big name for us. And I sold Rotor at that time. And so
Ooh.
Krug was also in our portfolio. So it was really a time when that was kind of those brands were starting to be, you could almost say they were the grower champagnes, right? Because we really didn't have kind of like grower champagnes at that time. And so
So Krug and Roedre and Tétanger
we're in
and
my
Veuve Clicquot were like
those
growing
were
champagne.
Yeah, well, in the sense that, they were the champagnes that were becoming known, right? They weren't really that
Okay.
known. So then I went to work for an importer. I went to work for Shefflin in Somerset, and that importer was the importer for Moet Chandon. And I
Mhm.
realized a lot about the market, how segmented it can be in different cities in the United States, and how you have different markets even within those cities. So that was a really great education in knowing more about champagne. After 9/11, I moved to Connecticut, and that was about the time that really grower champagnes had started to become a thing. So I want to say about 20 years ago, which is when you see like Jancis start to write about it and some other people. And so now in our shop where I work, we sell pretty much grower champagnes. Probably the biggest known name in our shop is Bollinger. But other than that,
Okay.
we sell really pretty much just grower champagnes.
So
Uh,
can you tell me who you sell?
so yeah, absolutely. I can tell you that we sell Chapois. Uh,
Okay, very good.
Also, I can tell you that we sell Mousse, uh,
Yes.
which I happen to have here. I can turn around and tell you that we sell Hebrart, and we sell Dom Perignon is the one big brand that we have for the high
Okay.
and Bollinger Grand Année. But
Mm-hmm.
for the most part, we have created a niche in the store that tells you that we sell things that are well known, but also things that are more connoisseur, I want to say,
Mm-hmm.
like. And so people who come in, and sure, we get people who come in looking for Veuve and Moet. And a lot of those times they're actually looking for the actual branding, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
If they are looking for champagne and we talk to them a little bit further, then we can talk about some of the champagnes that we have. And so we can create a conversation around, champagne and what it means and the styling and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Around Christmas time, we have a champagne tasting with one of our importers, and that is a big deal because customers who love bubbles come and really get an appreciation of the different styles and what they really like. And so we've created an audience that has really tuned in to what it is that we have, and they become consistent about what they buy.
Yeah, well, if you have Mousset and Geoffroy, Ebrard, you have good producers to start off with. So, some, star producers, actually, I often talk about this little niche of star producers, people that a long time ago started, to work with the terroir that they had. So Geoffroy, obviously in Cumières, Cédric Mousset in Cuil, so a little bit further down the Vallée de la Marne. Meunier, both of them, Cumières, also a lot of Pinot Noir, obviously. Um, so, this is quite interesting that, people are asking, or interested in these things. So when people come in and they ask, for instance, for Veuve Clicquot, Do you have Veuve Clicquot or not?
We do not have
You do not. So
no.
if they don't want to get any of the, if they really want to get Veuve Clicquot, they're going to leave and get some, go somewhere else. Or most of the time, maybe you can convince them to
Most
buy whatever you've got.
So most of the time, I can speak to someone about champagne
Mhm,
and the conversation, asking for Veuve Clicquot is never a conversation stopper, so to
mhm,
speak, right? It is always the opportunity to speak to consumers about
mhm.
what it is they like or don't like. But quite often, when people come in for Veuve, it is because it is for a gift and they have
Okay.
a friend who loves the orange label, right? And so that becomes important and part of the branding and part of what they are transmitting in terms of what that person wants, right?
Mhm,
So when they want that, I will very happily tell them where they can find it. There are other places that they can find that. But it also allows me to talk about the grower champagnes and the other
mhm,
options that we have, right? And a few times people do come back and say, "Hey, we talked about champagne. Can you tell me a little bit more about this or that?" And so it allows us to be able to do that. And not just obviously the champagne conversation, but also bubbles in general,
mhm,
right? That bubbles can be so many things as we've talked about before, everything from Cremant to we have, um, a Cremant from the Loire Valley, a Vouvray spa. So those become important conversations. So
mhm.
I love that even when we don't have a product, we can have a conversation around champagne anyway.
Yeah. And are people interested of learning more about different bubbles? Like, say, for instance, if they leave with a bottle of Geoffroy or a bottle of Mousset or even Bollinger Grand Tanné or Dom Perignon, if they really want something very unique for people. I do live in Auvillers, my village, so I guess. But do they then come back and, for instance, with the growers or Ebrard and ask for another one? Because, obviously these producers, they make several cuvées. Do you carry more than one, I guess?
Do. We do. For the Mousset, we sell, several of them,
Okay.
um, and then for the Gevrant, we definitely, especially closer to Christmas time, we definitely expand our range of the things that we do, but people do come back, and I think in a previous conversation, we talked about how I had a customer who wanted to celebrate her birthday here, and
Mhm,
we did special private tasting, and there were
mhm,
7 different sparklings that we had here, and I believe one was a pet nat out of California. We had a prosecco, we had the Cremant de Loire, and we
mhm.
had 3 champagnes, and we did them completely blind. And it was really interesting to see what people really liked. And in this particular group, they really love that kind of brioche, kind of like toasty, um, flavors, I wanna say, that you kinda get from some champagnes, but also the Pinot Meunier from Musset was a big hit, there's just a really great delicacy to that wine that it's hard not to like, and I think people part of the reason and we've talked about it, how there is an approachable quality to some of the champagnes that don't have that high acidity that some people don't really like, right? And so with some of the champagnes that we have, we specifically try to target, a flavor profile that really appeals to a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you spoke about Meunier, and Meunier is the most fruitful grape variety, and also, Cedric is one of the people that often is in the last people to pick. Um, First of all, because his village is normally, towards the end for picking, but even within the village, he waits. Cumières, where Geoffroy is often one of the first villages in Champagne where they start picking. But Jean-Baptiste very rarely goes in the beginning with like a full team. He normally waits as well, goes with a small team, pick, whatever is really ripe and needs to be picked, but normally waits for, optimal ripeness. And unfortunately, that is something that, a lot of champagne misses, because, champagne, as I've written many times, is a lot about quantity. And, if you don't have enough alcohol, then you add sugar. So you make more quantity. So, that is just one of, these are things that are part of the Champagne Society, which are like, I think maybe people don't necessarily understand. Yesterday, you told me that the, that group of people that they really liked the Vouvray as well.
Yeah, they did, and I think we have, it was this one, Domaine Pichot, and
Okay.
so that went over really well, and it like I said, it's
And
really.
that was blind that they like
Yeah, I
that.
did everything blind. I made sure that I uncorked everything under a towel and I took off the wrapping around the paper, because people are very much influenced by labels and what they
Yeah.
think get a hint on. And so, but it went over really, really well. And so I think there is also this desire. We sell a lot of we have little green stickers on our pricing tags, and it
Hmm.
indicates that wines are organic or biodynamic. We kind
Hmm.
of spread those things, so we want to tell people. And so people have really kind of transitioned and taken the knowledge of they want organic foods and they want to know how things are farmed. And certainly part of having some of the champagne selections that we have is the fact that we have thoughtful growers in our.
Yes. They are both. I think that they will be, I think Cedric is converted now, but obviously not the champagne yet. And Geoffroy, I think last year or this year, they're also organic. I can't remember if they're getting their certification this year or whether they got it in 25, but, that's it's at Ebrar or not. But, they do work more thoughtfully. I guess these people probably come, if I remember how the importing business went, they probably come through a similar distributor or importer.
They
So
do.
they come from the same book, I guess.
They do. And I think that leads into a really important thing that we talked about, which is that an importer is as important as the brand of champagne. And I hate to use the word brand with some of these growers, but it's important to have the right importer. And a
Hmm.
lot of these importers, a lot of these champagne brands are with an importer. In this case, it happens to be Skurnik, right? And Skurnik is well
A
recognized,
great importer.
an importer that really brings in really high quality items, right? And so quite often I actually have a conversation with our customers about not just something that they like, but they're like, "Oh, I don't recognize some brands." It gives me a chance to talk about the back of the label, right? And to talk
Hmm.
importer. And I say to them, if you're somewhere and you don't know anything about the wines that you're looking at, turn it around and look at the importer, right? So we're talking about, Skurnik or Kermit Lynch, or in our
Hmm.
area, it's somebody called DB. So you have these importers who are of quality, who would be bringing in, very high quality items, and it allows you to trust that back label so that you can drink the front label. I want to say, kind of thing. So
Yeah.
an
And
importer, important.
the import is important, and I know Koenig, specifically, they've done a lot of work for champagne. Every year they have, at least one champagne tour where they may do two, but like normally they have a tour where people go and they go from city to city. I know Cedric
Yep.
goes, I know Jean Baptiste has been, Sacha Geoffroy has been. So, Marc Ebrard, there's quite a few people that I know that are on that portfolio. It's a great portfolio, and they go, basically they do the tour together.
Yeah.
A little bit like a long time ago, we used to do the TGIC tour. Like I remember those things, flashbacks. But but what I do know from a sales perspective, obviously, that this has a huge impact because you create relationships with the distributors. So the importer creates, relationships between the wineries and the distributors, and also then between the shop owners, sommeliers, the trade that eventually will sell the wine, which is really important. France is far away, so we can't bring everybody to France. So it's quite good if they can bring this little part of champagne and get that across. And I think some houses, for instance, have been very good at having that um that setup where when you speak to people, for instance, people selling Bollinger or Rhodra has the same import in the UK, the US. Um, I think LVMH is their own importer
Yeah.
distributor. So obviously they know what they are talking about. They have, for instance, Ludovic Duplessis, who is today at Telmont, but before he worked for a long time as a big brand ambassador for Dom Perignon. So, he was living in the US and, he met all these people because of what he was doing. So I think it is that part is important. So if you were, for instance, to give advice to somebody like Philippe, like Marissa last year bought wine at the Biodivin tasting in New York for a friend of mine, Philippe Lancelot, who was looking for an importer in the US. And you said that quite a few people in that tasting were looking for importers and they weren't too sure. Biodivin normally stays in France. They don't go too far. But they obviously they went to the States because America is an important market. What advice would you give them?
I would say that first, obviously, you want to find an importer who is trustworthy.
Mhm,
You need to find an importer that aligns with your same values. And so you want to find someone, if you're an organic producer, perhaps you want to look at the portfolio of the importer and see what other producers they have, either from the area or from other countries, and how well respected they are in the United States, and also who their distributor is, right? I think that a lot of the shift has focused from the work all being done by distributors, so to speak, to a
mhm,
lot of the work, as we know from having worked together, to a lot of the work being shifted to the importer, and the importer
mhm,
really being hugely responsible for having to make sure that the brand is in the market, because the importer has their own salespeople in the market,
mhm,
right? So they have to work the market even beyond what the distributor does and go into different places. So I think that's really important about division. Also knowing the market. The market
mm,
in Chicago is different than the market in LA, that is different than Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, you're talking bigger, splashier, large format bottles, perhaps,
mhm,
whereas the market in Connecticut is very different, even financially, from who runs the markets, right? New Hampshire is a controlled state. So you need
mhm,
an importer that definitely um, knows the entire US market. Or if you're only rolling out initially regionally, can you roll out later on nationally, right? And is that importer a national importer? So, in Connecticut, we have something called min pricing. The pricing
mhm,
set by the state. I mean, the state enforces a minimum
mhm.
price. New Hampshire is a controlled state, and you have other things like that. Pennsylvania is completely
Controlled,
different.
yeah.
So you definitely want to have an importer who knows the market and can negotiate with the distributor about all of those things, and making sure that your wine is in the right place at
Mm,
the right time, right? Because those are all really important things. You don't want to be trying to roll out a rosé, in the spring, because it's already too late, So
yeah,
it's that timing that may seem like a small thing, but it's really important, because in a place like, let's say, Cape Cod or the
mhm,
Hamptons, you can't be rolling out in the spring, right? It's already too late to roll
yeah.
out product. So I think it's really important that the relationship with the importer be one of understanding, not just of where you stand, but obviously financial also. That's really important.
But, a lot of people, because, obviously today, especially the SGV, is pushing. So the Syndicat Général des Vignerons (SGV) is the organization that groups growers together, and so they are pushing more exports because the French market is collapsing. It's been doing badly for a long time. I think there are many reasons, but I think maybe the main reason is that French people just do not drink the way they drank before. It's new generations, new things. It's just it's a different thing. So, um, what they are trying to, obviously push to export, and the US is the biggest export market from, Champagne's biggest export market. Now, a lot of these people are small, like Philippe, for instance, he is quite small. I think he produces between 25,000, 40,000 bottles, if that much already. And there's a lot of people that are like that. So they probably will not be picked up by a importer like Skurnik, because literally it will not work, because Skurnik will not be able to put it in the market everywhere where they want to, and I think the people here will not want to sell everything to one importer, because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, which is logical in a way. There are some smaller, I know, for instance, for organic people, I think Vincent Laval, he's with your friend at
Transatlantic.
Transatlantic Bubbles. There's quite a few small ones. And I think Transatlantic Bubbles is only on the East Coast, but
I
I think
think
it
so.
does. I
I
think it
think so.
does
I
New
think
York
that
as well.
I think it does. I think the thing is, like, right, if you have a limitation in terms of the product, and also
Most
it
most
costs,
people will have a limitation,
right,
actually.
and also it costs for each state to, like, to file a label, right? So,
Mhm.
for example,
Okay, yeah, you need to file a label in each state.
right,
I've forgotten about that. It's true. I
right.
remember
Yep.
I remember doing that.
Right? So each label, let's say for like Connecticut, I forget, it costs a couple of $100, I think, to file a label
Mhm,
in, like, so it has to be worth it. So quite often, I mean, Connecticut is right next to New York, but it's quite often that we don't see a lot of the things that it's a double-edged sword. A lot of times, because we are next to New York, we will see some things come over, right? But there's times where it's not coming over because, let's say, there's only going to be like 5 cases that might be
mhm,
available because of a limited quantity.
yeah.
Is it worth it to file, you know, an item, depending on what the price is, for as much as it is, or to file an entire line, right? So,
Mhm,
if it's going to cost you $1,200 because there are so many SKUs, right? So you can't really do that. But I do think that you could possibly do something with, let's say, if it was a Skurnik, it's possible. But again, you would have to allocate where those things are going to go, right? Like, where
mhm,
in that market is it going to go? Is it going to go to the biggest markets? Is it going to go to New York, LA? Is it going to go to Vegas? But also, you have smaller markets that are really appreciative of
mhm.
those things, right? So then you might have to make a decision. So, Ohio, because I know that Skurnik is in Ohio.
Ohio
So,
has a wonderful selection of champagne, and my brother lives in Ohio, so obviously
right.
I I know, like I know this the market of Ohio quite well, for bizarre reasons, but I knew it for Sauvignon Blanc, I know it for champagne, so
Right? So you do see it. So, I think it's an individual, but I do like the idea that there are these individual importers. And also, there's an interesting thing that's also happening that is almost like sub importers almost. So, like, we have there's for like some Spanish wines, Jose Pastor is an importer, but then in Connecticut we have this other smaller importer called Ungrafted that then sub imports. So you have states doing kind of like the sub importing that allows you to bring in some small quantities of items into states. So we do see some of that. And I think it's really interesting to see what people are doing almost like on a micro level, right? So
Mhm.
micro importers to bring those things in. But I think, like, let's say to bring in something directly, if you're an importer in Connecticut, to bring in, let's say, like Philippe Blanco, like it's impossible to do it.
Yeah.
That's a lot of capital outlay that you put out.
Yeah, no, no. So it would be very complicated in that. And so when you are, we are talking about these people importing in a small amount. So you need to try and tag on to other things. Now, what I wanted to ask you is, obviously I'm well aware of the 3-tier system in the US, as you are, and I think a lot of viewers as well. But maybe you can quickly explain it, and maybe also explain why it's a really, maybe, at least in my opinion, a bad idea to go through a French broker, because that's what most people do, is because they don't necessarily, a lot of these people, they're in the vineyard, they're small, if they come up, it's because, they've been working in a vineyard. They don't necessarily have people looking after, the sales like I did at a marker. And then, so these, when they get some renown, there's then brokers that will come see them, and then the broker will use his or her contacts to then try and place them. But obviously, that means that there's percentages coming on, which means that these wines often hit the market at prices where they are near impossible to sell to people, like 150, $200. So, so maybe we can explain why it is a bad idea to do this.
It's interesting because it's been a while that somebody actually came to talk to me about, how do we enter the U.S. market? And it was an
Mhm.
Italian winery, and they literally didn't know like how this market works. And I had to
Mhm.
explain, and they said, well, we want to put the wine on the shelf at X price. And I'm like, well, exactly how are you going to do that? I think it was like a really low price, right? But I then had to work them backwards. I had to
Yeah,
work them backwards in terms of like, well, you need a distributor, right? And a distributor is going to want a margin, and it's going to want as much of a margin as it
it's
could get,
possible.
right? That's not going to be a popular opinion, but they're going to want a margin as much as possible. And then you have the importer, and the importer obviously plays, I think, a very important role because
Mhm.
it knows what distributor it is going to be placed with. Because you can be an importer and have different distributors across different
Mhm.
states, right? I know there's a lot of consolidation going on in the United States right now. But basically, the three-tier system says that it goes from producer to distributor to either a wine shop or a restaurant. What often gets overlooked in that, I think, is the importer part, right?
Mhm.
Because you have an importer who sells to the distributor, although absolutely distributors can be importers, and
Mhm.
a lot of them do, right? That's not
Mhm.
really, it's not an impediment for them. So I think that getting the right importer in the United States that knows the market is what really, if you look at the history, and I've looked at the history of, let's say, like Bollinger,
Mhm.
they had an importer in New York, but they also had a small importer in Boston, right? Who knew that market. And unlike today, a lot of times an importer we will want exclusive um line,
Yeah.
exclusive use of their product, right? They don't want to have to compete with another importer in another market. And some people divide markets, right? East and west of the
Mhm.
Mississippi, people have done that. But I think, when you have people say that if you have an exclusive importer, then you have more of a loyalty, right? That you have that kind of, um, kind of like people can own the brand, and that can become important. I used to work for a company that said the motto was, when you take care of the brand will take care of you. And in a sense, in the olden days, that was because it did pay out. If you look at
Mhm.
a lot of the old liquor brands and how they developed them, you know, the brand did pay. There was commissions, there were rewards and all kinds of things. And that doesn't quite work as well anymore these
Mhm.
days, right? It's a really competitive market. The margins are much thinner than they used to be. So I think that having an importer in the United States and knowing how the market really, really works
Yeah.
is super important. Um,
Yes.
how you get goods out of the warehouse, what taxation is all about, how that costs. You can have pulling stuff out of the warehouse, and then you pay taxes on it.
Mhm.
The taxes on sparkling, by the way, are much higher here than
Yeah,
they are.
yeah, like in the UK, yes.
So, it's interesting. So I remember when I worked for TGIC with you, you
Mhm.
know, we were looking at pricing, and every time I did a spreadsheet, I had to look, oh, well, this sparkling wine from Argentina is going to have a much higher cost because the taxes are so much higher. I don't remember why that is. Or like if it's over a certain percentage, right? If it's over, I think, 14.5%.
Yeah, If
that.
it's over 14.5%.
Yeah.
Sparkling, it's the same in the UK. Sparkling wine has, has more, duty, so
You
it's,
know why that is? I don't really remember why it
I don't
is.
know, maybe because you get drunk quicker on sparkling wine. I have no idea, that's a there's one last thing I'd like to ask, because my one of my colleagues at Wine Searcher, the US editor at Wine Searcher, Blake Gray, he often writes about those direct sales, those internet sales, and I just thought about it when you mentioned the state of Ohio because I think I told you this the other day. I have a friend, an Italian friend who lives in Florida, and he, oops, somebody's calling me. Sorry, I don't know what happens. So just somebody called me. I don't know, some strange call. So he is in. Is it still working?
Yes, it
Sorry.
is.
No, no, I'm sorry because the screen went white. Okay. So he's an Italian importer. He imports a lot of wine from Italy and from France. So regularly when I send wine to my family, I buy the wine from him and he then sends it to Cleveland to my brother or to Chagrin, basically. So that, I know what I'm buying. He's getting it. Generally, these are wines that maybe are not in his market. Do you think this is an option for a new champagne brand to work with? Because this guy's a small importer, obviously. So, do you think this is an option for people like that, or is this, if you're a new brand, don't do this because, obviously, not everybody buying wines will know as much,
Right.
you know, about
Wait,
these things than maybe people that have worked in the wine trade. Let's put it that way.
right.
Okay.
So when you say, like, shipping, let's say, like, you're talking about not shipping from France, you're talking about shipping
Shipping
within.
from Florida, yeah.
Oh, shipping from, like, so I think every day I get this digest about what's going on in the industry, and
Mhm.
a lot of times there is an article about, shipping directly and all of these things, and I think it's very I would be cautious because the thing is that all the states have different laws. We have
Yeah.
been having lawsuits, and people trying to figure out, like, well, what's legal, what's not
Mhm.
legal. The 2 largest or 3 largest, the US Post Office and the 2 FedEx and UPS and whatever else, so it's a very, I think, fraught place to try to do
Mhm.
business. I think I think it would be difficult for a small producer
To do
to
this.
do it, to be shipping like that. But then again, if you are in a state where, let's say, a store has a large enough audience to be able to do that,
Yeah.
then you may be able to do that. But you have to then think beyond that, right? Because part of being an importer is also thinking, what is the long-term vision of this
Mm.
brand? So what's going to
Yeah.
happen? Brand has it been pigeonholed into a place, right? Is it only limited to this audience? How do you expand it, right? And expansion doesn't necessarily mean that you're talking about much larger number of cases, but just who gets exposed to your brand and who knows
Yes.
about your wine, right? So I think I think here in the US, I think it's a challenge, I will say, about
Okay.
shipping directly to consumers, even though, as you well know, there's a big fight by quite a few people saying that everyone has a right to get
It's
wine shipped to them,
I
right?
I think, yeah, I think it's on its way or it's there already to the Supreme Court. One of these. I
Yeah,
think
I
it's the state
think
of Ohio actually as well, if I
it's a
remember
deal.
from what Blake said. No, I was just basically wondering because this is something I have done before, knowing exactly what I wanted to send. My friend has it. I know he can do it. I don't know, people in Ohio that have those wines that I can send them. Obviously, I'm not in America, so it's not that easy. But I was just wondering about it because I know there's a lot of articles written about this on Wine Searcher, and I know Blake Gray talks about this a lot. So I was wondering, is this something champagne producers could think about to keep their costs down because, to miss, to cut out some of the costs because the cost leaving Champagne generally for smaller producers is quite high. So I think the average cost last year, and obviously you must be very careful with the average cost. Is was more than 21 euros. So, in dollars today, I think it would be like 25, $26 leaving FOB Champagne. So then
Right.
you have to add everything
Right.
else on. But what I'm saying is, this is the average cost. Well, the average cost for all wine that left Champagne. So that means Cuvée Prestige, everything, buyer's own brand for Costco, so there's literally everything in between. But it's just that we know this is the average price, which makes it very difficult to enter a market like the US.
Right, 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 because there's all of these things along it. So you would still have to file, let's say, and I don't know what it is in Florida, but you would still have to file a label. Now, could I see if somebody committed, let's say, if like a store that had multiple outlets in Florida committed to like, okay, I'm going to bring in 10 champagne producers
Mhm.
and I'll kind of put them together and then I'm going to make an effort to, but that's a
It's a
very
risk. It's a
big
risky.
risk, and it's a risk on both sides, right?
Yeah.
Again, you're trusting an individual and an
Hmm.
organization, and you may or may not know anything about them, right? And then what happens if they decide it's not selling as well, or then and all those things. So at least usually with importers, you kind of know, like, what's going on and if they're reputable, you're kind of kept in the loop as to what's going on in terms of sales, where it's going, who your distributors are. But it is a challenge because as you've said, by the time champagne arrives here and it's gone through the three-tier system, the prices are quite high.
Yeah, it's and depending on where you are, a lot of it is near, $100. So you think, whoa, it's like $40 back home. What's going on?
Right, right.
So it does make a difference. So is there in the US, like in New Zealand, when I was still working there for a marker, there was a you know a book, a guide that you could buy with all the importers or reputable importers in New Zealand and Australia. So we looked at this for Australia, a few times because we changed distributors a few times while I was there. Um, is there something like that in the US? Is there something that champagne winemakers could count on and say, this person is reputable, this one is not? Because most of these people, they find an importer. For instance, when there's the Printemps de Champagne, there's a lot of people that come, but these people are not necessarily the big importers. That's like somebody that says, I want to drink champagne cheaper, so I'm going to import and I'm going to sell to my three friends, and I'm shipping, somewhere else, and it's very difficult for like I said for these winemakers, especially growers, to know because there's very little um, you know information on the different markets.
Yeah.
And I know that AGV does some courses on it, and I've seen some of the material, and I'm like, oh my God, and that is just from the experience I had a long time ago. But obviously, I knew the US market well. It was our biggest market, and we sold a lot of Sauvignon in there. So it. It is, I remember, I spent a lot of time there, but I do know that it's very complicated. So I don't know, is this something that people can see whether this is a good import, or maybe should they go through a broker because the broker might know, or
You know,
what would be your advice?
it's interesting that you asked that because I don't think there is like an unofficial
Mm.
guide. It's almost like
An
those,
unofficial, yeah.
right? An unofficial guide,
Yes.
like to tell you this is a good
The
import.
who's who of the
Right.
importing business.
Right. Most of the time, like you end up talking to people, and that's how you know whether somebody's a reputable person or not. Right. And, do people have to file, probably legal, things like that. But I remember even like 15 years ago, helping somebody find importers or distributors in other states. And it's very difficult. There isn't like this book that kind of tells
Mhm.
you that you can find the importers or that who's reputable, because I think that's always a risk of somebody saying, well, hey, that's not fair about my company, or, it's very difficult. I think most of the time what you do is you end up talking to people. And I think
Mhm.
it's like the same as when I did the representation for Philippe, where I had a couple of wineries come up to me and ask me, you know, do you know an importer? How do I do this? Is there
Mhm.
something do? Because I do think that you do have to rely on somebody who knows the American market and who knows
Mhm.
the importers and what your goal is. So you could do a small importer that's maybe on the East Coast, if maybe
Mhm.
that's where you want to focus, right? If you don't have a lot of wine and you want to focus on that, my advice would certainly be that you kind of have to go to, trade shows in the
Yeah.
United States and find out who the importers are. And I know this seems very simple, but look at your favorite kinds of brands or things that
Mm.
are reputable or that you respect, and who is the importer for that.
Yeah.
Look on the back of the label, like almost everyone has an importer on the
Mhm.
back, because they need one. And so looking on the back of that and see what the competition is within that, because some importers have a lot of the
Mm.
same style in their book and they may not need another one. But
Yeah.
also within Champagne, you have so many villages and you have so many areas that an importer could add to the portfolio, because they can say, now I have, a champagne from this particular area and things like
Mhm.
that. But I do think it is a challenge, and I do think that you have to talk to people. I think that's the only way that you can really get a sense of what's going on, and
Okay.
who might be the best um importer suited for your business.
Yeah. So you have to come spend some time in America,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, it's
You know,
I'm not saying that, because certainly, I've been to
they have to learn English to start off
well,
with.
but I've been to Vinexpo, right? And so with you
Yes.
and for like, and that is huge, and there are a lot of Americans, and I don't know the number of maybe importers from the US who might go to Vinexpo to look
There's
for.
quite a few, I think. Yeah.
There are. But because the United States is such a big market, it's almost like the wineries come looking to the US for importers, and importers almost don't have to go. And that may be a big assumption, but it's almost like they don't have to go to, let's say, to Vinexpo or somewhere else,
I
because
yeah,
at the
I no no they most of actually a lot of people go just because it's a place where you can taste everything. But when I still worked in New Zealand, it was Pro Wine, the big one. It was in Vinexpo, um, and although I did go once, really in a hot Vinexpo in Bordeaux, but the thing to do, and I think a lot of people don't do this, is to see who are the different importers and contact them in advance, because you need to have appointments.
correct.
And if you don't have the appointments, what happens is you just get people coming. So what most people do is a very French thing to do, something I noticed. So I was quite shocked about this actually, is they just collect cards and then they call these people back,
Right.
okay, or they send emails or whatever, but they don't necessarily know exactly what they want from an importer before. They just, all they want is they want to shift wine, but they don't really think too much about the ins and outs of this. And, that can cause quite a lot of problems. I sorted out quite a few of those problems we had when I came to America. And, because, it took a while to get everything, back on track.
Right.
Because, like, here, most people actually do not have the insurance. We in New Zealand, we had insurance that, if people bought, and for whatever reason, the sec after a few containers, the payments didn't come through, that you were insured, and the insurance would go after them with legal action and stuff. So here, a lot of people don't have that. Um, you
Yeah, and
know,
they're important,
you,
Also,
growers, if you look at the export market, there's only, 10, 12% of growers and cooperatives together in that export market. It's like 88, 90% houses that export their wine, across the world, not just in the US. So you see that it's just a small part, but it is today, it's the segment of the market that continues to grow. Before we leave, because I'm looking at the time, it's been
okay.
so interesting. I just want to ask, are you still selling champagne? Is it still easy to sell champagne, or do people want, I don't know, Prosecco, Cremant, Pet Nat, any of those things?
They no, we definitely sell. I mean, we have a fair amount. Like I think we have 2 rows of champagne versus
Okay.
a row that has cava and has, non-cava Spanish and has Cremant and
Mhm.
Prosecco. And we definitely sell a lot of Prosecco, no question about it. I think the interesting thing is how much more um, champagne would I sell if the people who came in asking for champagne really did mean champagne, right? Because
Okay.
people
Ooh, the CIBC is not gonna like this.
well, it that is just
They still use the word champagne for any sparkling wine?
absolutely.
Oh,
Oh,
wow. I thought that was finished.
no. In fact, I am very conscious of the fact that when somebody comes in and says champagne, I point to all our sparkling wines and then I single out champagne as being
Okay.
specific because people do associate champagne with bubbles and they use the term interchangeably quite often. And I try to meet people where they are in terms
Mhm.
of their wine education and say, and make sure that what they're looking for is what they want. So if they say they want a champagne and I say, what price point are you looking at? And they tell me something about $25, then I know they're not talking about champagne,
Yeah,
right?
from champagne, okay, yes.
Right? So it's just being very conscious, but definitely people use that interchangeably all the time. They never make that mistake with Prosecco. If they want Prosecco, they don't say they're looking for champagne. They say they're looking for Prosecco.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
quite
So
interesting.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If they're looking for Prosecco, they're looking and then and then there are some people who have gotten to know, let's say, a Cremant, and then they're just like, "Oh, I'm looking for a Cremant or a Cava or that kind of thing." But definitely, Prosecco is Prosecco, but champagne a lot of times means just
Could be
bubble.
anything.
It could be anything. So,
Wow. Okay. Well, we got like a little comment here. It says, "This has been a great conversation. Thank you both." So
oh,
that's really nice.
I love
Um, I'm gonna,
around
basically,
it.
I'm gonna let you go because you need to open the shop.
I do.
You need to sell some champagne now. Like we can't just talk about it. Obviously, I will post this. We will share it. I think this conversation indeed was very interesting for anyone trying to understand the champagne market, a consumer in the US, and also people here that want to export to the US. Like I said, US remains the biggest export market. So there's a lot of people in America that want to drink champagne from champagne. Okay. Uh,
But
and
but
so champagne with the small C and the big C for the region. And, and obviously there's a lot of people here that want to, or that are looking for different export markets. And, US always is at the top of people's minds. So even though the sales were down and, the OEV data is not looking very good for no market, actually, for no, I think New Zealand was the only market that sold a little bit more into the US in the first quarter of the year. But you know, maybe your president will drive people so depressed that everybody will start drinking a lot more,
gosh.
which would be very good for us.
It's such an incredibly competitive market here in the
Mm.
US, right? That, it isn't people have so many options, right? It isn't just, they have the option not only of champagne, but they have the option of so many other bubbles from around the world. So, and they're very, it's very, they can change their minds at any time, right? They can say, "Oh, well, I don't want it in that price range. I can switch to a Cremant or I can switch to a Cava." And so you have the ability to to sell in many ranges. So I think that's the thing about champagne that makes it challenging, right? You could have a specific point of sale for your champagne, but it's also competing against so many other things in
Mhm.
this market. So, but
Yeah, and especially if people don't even know that champagne comes from champagne, with all the efforts the CIBC has invested in that. And they know Prosecco comes from Prosecco. The fact that they didn't know, I could understand maybe, but that they know Prosecco and they don't know champagne, that to me, I'm quite shocked about, honestly.
yeah, they know Prosecco is Italian. There is no question that, they come in for Prosecco, they know they're looking for specifically Prosecco. They're not confused about it being Cava, they're not confused about it being Cremant. But when people come in and say champagne, I have to really make sure that they mean champagne with a big C, and not just, bubbles. But it's all good. And, I always want to meet people where they are. I love sharing stories about wine and champagne and all of that. And if they walk away happy, then that's really what's the most important thing here. So, but
That's good.
but
Well,
thank you
thank you
for
so
yeah,
much. It was so good. It was so cool to have this conversation and come visit me soon again in
I know, I
Champagne.
have to.
You were my first visitor ever. After 2 days that I was here, you were here,
Really? Oh my God.
2011. So, anyway, thank you so much.
So much.
And thank you everybody for watching and for everybody watching the video later. Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.